Please welcome Gabe Klein.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster than normal, if that's possible, because I know we're a little behind on time. But I do want to say one thing before I start. I was talking to Kent Gart, and I said, you know why I love coming out to Colorado, why I love coming to Denver? There's so many reasons, but the real reason is that on the East Coast, I'm always the most underdressed at the event. And here, I'm the most overdressed at the event, which I think is just great. I should have worn my shorts like I planned. No, seriously, I'm jealous. So anyway, I'm going to come at this from a little bit more of an urban perspective. One of the things you really feel today is you feel the fact that there's this understanding in this room, and I hope throughout Colorado, the sort of mind, body, spirit, nature, place connection. And I got to tell you, you don't see that everywhere. You definitely don't. And, you guys already know this, but we're facing a real crisis. And there are a lot of people out there that are in denial. And unfortunately, oh yeah, you can see it. Okay, good. Actually, I was in Canada, in Edmonton, and I made a joke about people there should be happy that he gave up his Canadian citizenship. Inappropriate joke. But they laughed. Seriously, this has become a political football, and it's not, and it shouldn't be. This is a real problem. I was reading this morning that California, along the coastline, is actually sinking due to the aquifers being emptied. It's basically becoming a giant sinkhole along the coast. The other major problem that we're facing is this acceptance that we have of fatalities on our streets. And this is a big reason why kids don't get out more like they used to. There are, a tremendous amount of people, 1.24 million people lose their lives on our roads every year worldwide, 32,000 in the United States. When you look worldwide and you drill down into the numbers, half of those people are disadvantaged people. They're poor people, they're old, they're young, they're disabled, and it's not right and it's not fair, and we have to stop accepting that as a part of life. The other thing, the fastest growing chronic disease in children is type 1 diabetes, which they have now linked to pollution. Pollution, particularly in urban areas and particularly in third world countries. This is another big issue that we have to address. So let's take a step back, because I think one of our flaws as human beings is that we continually sort of come back to what we know now, what we see in our lifetime. And, Juan talked about the people over 40, and I would say even the people over 50 or 60, I would give credit to, who fought in the civil rights movement and so on. But the downside of those generations is that they only know the car culture, the lack of nature, the sort of technocracy that's come up in the last 30 years. And this is how things used to be. Things used to be a lot simpler. Now, there were fatalities, there were issues, but the streets were for people, not for a particular mode. And the other thing is, we tend to think that congestion is a bad thing. It's a bad word. If you're in a political conversation, congestion comes up, that's a bad word. I would argue that congestion is a good word. It's just the type of congestion that you have. How do you think the stores in this downtown street in Seattle, how busy do you think those stores are? How much commerce is happening? A lot of commerce. And what's also interesting when you look at cities, the most valuable real estate is often the real estate that hasn't changed that much in the last century. This was also in Seattle. I was there about a month ago, Pike Place, or the waterfront in Boston. Places that are either making a big comeback or haven't changed are really seeing huge pluses on the economic side. My friend Jeanette Sadekhan, her great experiment with Times Square, and I give her so much credit for doing a pilot program in such a big public way. And it's so important not to be fearful of failure, as she wasn't, and she was not, and she didn't fail. But we have the power to convert these spaces back to people spaces. You know, the traffic in New York City can't get any worse. It doesn't matter what you do. So you might as well shut down Times Square anyway. But unfortunately, you know, unlike Northern Europe and some other places, we didn't undo a lot of the planning mistakes that we made during the last half century. And so now we're suffering. And, you know, the energy problems and environmental problems are a result of us craving this sort of sprawling culture. And I personally, I love rural areas and I love urban areas. And what I can't tolerate is suburban areas where we're just using too much resource and too much land, right, for our own personal use. And it doesn't work. So what is happening now? How are things changing? Well, some things haven't changed for the good. I mean, let's be honest, this is a critical part of the problem and why we have a child obesity problem, why we have kids that are disconnected from nature, spending 7 to 10 hours a day on their iPad or television or phone, and I'm guilty of that myself. And what's interesting is when you talk to the parents, there's a couple things that really stand out. We live too far away, which speaks to what I was just talking about. And it's too dangerous because of traffic, particularly for younger kids. If you add that together, that's like 90%. And where I live in Washington, D.C., we have this family that they've now been in trouble twice with the police. Once because their kids went to the park alone, and then because their kids walked to school alone. So we have a super big cultural problem. Maybe not as bad here in Colorado, I don't know. But I can tell you in the East Coast, from D.C. down to Florida, particularly in the South, parents are being arrested on a semi-regular basis because their kids are actually walking outside alone. And like this lady talked about in this article, she lives 3 or 4 minutes from the school, and she realized her daughter's waiting up to 45 minutes for her to pick her up in the car. And it never occurred to her that she could just walk home by herself. But we've become a fearful society. And there are all kinds of ramifications of this fear. So what's interesting is people are starting to realize, wait a second, you know, in urban areas, wait a second, I guess I could just ride my bike to work or walk to work. Maybe I don't need that gym membership. I was in the Netherlands on a couple-week trip. I didn't see a single gym the entire time I was there. And everybody was a lot thinner than I was. And I thought, you know, I'm sort of thin for the US. No, I was like obese there. So what's happening? We're repurposing space in our cities. We're trying to undo the mistakes that we made. Unfortunately, I think I left out the after picture there. But you can Google Pennsylvania Ave bike lanes. You can see what we did with that space. But as we get more people out on bikes, walking, taking transit, they start to understand, wait a second, maybe we do need on big roads to segregate different types of traffic. Maybe it's not comfortable for somebody to be riding their bike next to a 4,000 or 5,000 pound car or truck. I was in San Francisco a few weeks ago in my friend Ed Reskin's office. He's the head of the SFMTA, looking out at Market Street. Look at the 6-lane road, and there's only one car lane, and there's a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit. So if we want to get our kids out walking and we as parents feel safe about it, this is the kind of arterial street that we need to build. And there's so many great things happening in Colorado, and I think, you know, if we can start to bridge the gap between the beautiful outdoors and the built environment with things like this, we can make a difference. I was in Minneapolis a few weeks ago by the university. Their new light rail line, they basically took a 6-lane main arterial in and out of the city, and they made it into 1 lane for cars shared with bikes at a very low speed limit, light rail, and then a people place in the middle of it. A little bit like 16th Street here. These projects, they're mega projects and they're cheap projects. And you know, one of the things you can do is you can remove the red tape, put together some design standards, and allow people to create their own public spaces. And that's something that we did in Chicago, and we just did an RFP, and there's going to be a nonprofit partnering with the private sector to activate about 59 locations all over the city. So you can do it piecemeal or you can do it on a large scale. And it's amazing. As soon as you build these things, guess what? They're full of people. The Bloomingdale Trail just opened last weekend. People said it couldn't be done. It was since 1998, it was an idea. When Mayor Emanuel came in, he brought me in, he said, I want this done now. That's how he operates. And we got it done. We went to construction in about 20 months, and now it's built and people are riding on it. And so you can take these spaces that are left over from the industrial age in urban areas, sorry, that's blurry, and you can make them into, really needed outdoor nature spaces. And here's a picture of the opening weekend, how many people are enjoying that. And it links 5 neighborhoods from a Latin neighborhood in Humboldt Park all the way to a sort of uppity white neighborhood, for lack of a better term, Bucktown. And there are great guidelines. There are NACTO guidelines so that you can design to the urban standard instead of the suburban standard. I was a fellow I'm on the board of NACTO. I was a fellow at the Urban Land Institute last year. We endorse them, and I'll tell you why. We endorse these guidelines because they're pro-business, and that's a message I really want to leave you with today. And you've heard it from a few other people. Pro-environment, pro-education, pro-people is pro-business. In the long term, it's pro-business. You might sacrifice some very short-term profits. But right now, what we're doing is we're extracting as much out of the earth as we can for short-term gain. But there's a big balloon payment due at the end, and I don't know that we have the money to pay it. So I would rather that we address it along the way. And what's interesting is when you look at what we're investing in, the private sector and the public sector agree, the stuff that has the biggest impact, we're not investing in it. We're investing in more hospitals, which I don't think we need. We definitely don't need more parking garages, since parking's going away in the next decade with autonomous vehicles, but we keep building it. But we're not investing in the things that make people feel like there's a sense of place in their city. And we know that this stuff works. We know that when you build protected bike facilities, when you widen the sidewalks, when you make people safe, guess what? Yes, they feel safer. There's fewer fatalities and injuries. Business goes up. There's a correlation there between people feeling safer and business going up. And Colorado's done a good job, but you can do more. You've improved, but you can do more. I live in the District of Columbia, which is obviously very urban, but we've cut traffic fatalities by 83% over 10 years. So it's interesting where we are as a country. We've got these two menaces happening, and they're converging. I'm watching my time. And so this is the most exciting time in transportation because everything's changing, and our view of what the future of transportation is going to look like is evolving. And there's all kinds of propaganda because there's a lot of money to be lost here when cars go away, for the most part, as we know them today. We don't have time to go into that. We can talk about it more maybe in the next session. So we have to make no small plans? Daniel Burnham. And so we have to make big, long, visionary plans, but then we also have to break them down to short, manageable steps and make that change. And DOTs need to stop focusing on moving people as fast as possible through urban areas. It's basically about everything else but that. And we have to redesign around people, which means putting the pedestrian first, as we did in Chicago. We publicly proclaimed this, and investing in these spaces. And we need to enforce the laws. And that's tough to do, but we need to start doing it because if a kid gets hit at 20 miles per hour, there's an 80% or 95% chance, that means I'm out of time, 95% chance that they're gonna live versus a 20 or 80% chance that they're gonna die at 40 miles per hour. So I'm gonna skip through the rest of this stuff. These suburbs can urbanize, but I like to leave you with a few notes. Linking the state's trails to each city and to each other, as the governor wants to do, is brilliant. And when I was in the Netherlands, that's what they're doing there now. They're building bicycle superhighways, and people are biking 30, 40 miles to work. So it doesn't just have to be for recreation. Again, pro-nature, pro-safety, pro-environment is pro-business. Continue to put your money where your mouth is. I mean, GoCo having that $835 million is an amazing investment, down payment on the future. And public-private partnerships are our past, and they are our future. And they're social entrepreneurs on both sides. And we need to embrace the commonalities, and we need to align our incentives so that we can be successful. We need to leverage technology to make change, but not for the sake of technology, for people. And we need to get kids off of iPads and onto bikes. And we bought bikes for 500 kids in Chicago in poor neighborhoods on the west side and the south side. We didn't tell them that we were giving them the bikes. We taught them for 2 weeks how to ride, and then we took them downtown. Some of them had never been downtown. Then we gave them the bikes and a helmet and a lock, and some of them said it was the most amazing thing that had ever happened to them. And you have to get as much done as you can while you have amazing transformative leadership as you do in Colorado. Thank you so much for listening.